Please welcome Dallas County Treasurer and NALEO President, Pauline Medrano.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Before we begin this morning's plenary session, we'd like to take a few minutes to celebrate the good work that has been accomplished over the course of this conference by many of the NALEO board members and friends who have contributed to our service project. The service project has become a NALEO annual conference tradition since we first asked members to join us in making wellness kits for veterans and their families living in our host city during our 2014 annual conference in San Diego. We have mobilized hundreds of volunteers since 2014 to ensure that NALEO is contributing to building stronger communities in the city which we've gathered. This year, with your help, we have assembled 750 survival and wellness kits that will be donated to Outlast Youth. The organization works to reduce and prevent LGBTQ youth homelessness in the Dallas area. In recognition that young people who identify as LGBTQ account for a significant disproportionate share of our youth experiencing homelessness. I'd like to extend our heartfelt thanks to the many contributors who made this service project a success. State Farm is our host for this year's project, and the company went above and beyond to encourage its Dallas-based team thank you, in contributing to the effort. State Farm employees donated more than 5,000 pairs of socks to be included in the survival kits. And so many individuals wanted to help with to assemble the kits that we actually had to turn them away. Thank you to State Farm and to your team for inspiring generosity. We also want to extend our appreciation to the sponsors of the service project and to our in-kind donors. Advance America, the Walt Disney Company, and Waste Management sponsored this year's efforts. Bank of America donated 1,000 containers of wet wipes. Johnson & Johnson contributed 1,000 first aid kits, and Toyota provided 1,000 tubes of toothpaste, toothbrushes, packages of feminine hygiene products, and granola bars. Please join me in applauding for all our partners and all their kindness. And for their concerns for some of our most vulnerable youth in the Dallas area. Finally, on behalf of NALEO, I want to thank each of you who dedicated your time and effort to this project. You have once again ably demonstrated what it means to be a public servant. Now, I'd like to welcome to the stage representatives of our service project, host and beneficiary. NALEO Education Fund Secretary and State Farm Counsel, Michelle Macias, is joined today by Outlast Youth the founder and program director, Josh Kogan. Please come to the stage.
I would like to thank each and every one of you for participating in the service project. And if you haven't yet, go by the booth and say hi to our many volunteers from State Farm. And I just wanted to very briefly just thank Councilman Adam Medrano, now Deputy Mayor Pro Tem, that's going to take some getting used to, for his leadership. So Outlast Youth, very briefly, was started under his leadership with the city's LGBT task force. And long story short, we partnered with a local agency that serves homeless youth here in Dallas, actually right down the street in North Oak Cliff. It's called Promise House. And so if you go by the NALEO booth, there are some flyers for Promise House. If you are local, we are doing a sleep out in November to raise awareness on youth experiencing homelessness. And I would love to speak to any one of you nationwide or locally about LGBTQ youth homelessness. There are some wonderful programs going on nationally, and I would encourage you to check out True Colors Fund, the national organization to end LGBTQ youth homelessness, to find ways that you guys can go back to your part of the country and engage in this work. So thank you.
Thank you, Josh, for all the good work that you do and Outlast Youth are doing in the community. State Farm is proud to support your mission and to stand with NALEO members who are working in communities around the country to promote the safety and well-being of all community members. On behalf of my State Farm colleagues, and especially the most generous colleagues in Dallas at our City Line facility, please accept these kits as a token of our gratitude and with our best wishes. And I'm also speaking on behalf of the NALEO members who contributed their time to assemble these kits. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle, and Josh, and Neighbor. Thank you. I hope that you will join us for this afternoon's and evening's concluding activities. Please following our plenary session, lunch will take place in the Austin Ballroom and feature a selection of Texas's signature dishes. We'll explore various aspects after our lunch, we'll explore various aspects of the fight against SB4 and anti-immigrant policies in our afternoon breakout sessions beginning at 2. Finally, we couldn't end this conference without celebrating Texas' famous love for football. We are excited to provide you with an extraordinary opportunity to experience life in the NFL as we enjoy an all-access pass to AT&T Stadium and home of the Dallas Cowboys. Buses will begin boarding for the trip to the stadium at 5 p.m. from the Olive Street entrance of the hotel. As always, please remember to bring your conference credentials. And now please welcome Texas State Senator, Chair of the Texas Senate Hispanic Caucus, and former NALEO President Sylvia Garcia to open our plenary session. And participate in the movement to oppose and eliminate SB4. I'd like to also remind participants that they can still sign the SB4 resolution at the NALEO booth. Thank you. Senator?
Thank you so much. And let's all give Pauline a big hand. I know that while a lot of work has been done by a number of people from staff and local officials to put this conference together, but let's give another hand to our president. As I said yesterday, it's always good to be able to say, Madam President. I'm just waiting to be able to do that at the White House. But today we're going to focus again on the bill that we've talked to you about. I hope you also have your buttons and will wear them for us to spread the word about not only this very bad legislation, but also arming ourselves with the information we need to unite ourselves to fighting legislation like this anywhere, in any state, in any city, anywhere in this country, because only working together will we be able to stop this kind of scapegoating and rhetoric. So today we're going to focus again on the racial profiling bill, and that's what I call it. Others call it the Show Me Your Papers bill, but it doesn't matter what we call it, because we know what it is. It's targeting our communities. So whether it is like what started in California under Pete Wilson with their proposition, or whether it's the Arizona SB 1070, or it's ours of SB 4, it is bad. Call it what you want, but it is bad. So for me, I mentioned to you in the opening remarks that we made at the beginning of this conference on Thursday, the one thing that we have already seen in Houston has been the drop in reporting of crimes. Remember what I said, already our police chief has found that reporting of rape among Hispanics is down 42.8%. The reporting of violent crimes is down by 13%. And that's just out of the fear of what the president is doing nationally, and knowing that SB 4 may come, because SB 4 does not take effect until September unless we stop it. And that's what we're going to focus on here today. On your program, you saw that Nina Perales was supposed to be here from Maldev. Maldev has always been there in the forefront of all litigation, whether it was the Proposition 187, SB 1070, or now SB 4. Maldev will be there again, and I know she's preparing for litigation. The hearing is on Monday. I know I plan to be there, and a lot of my colleagues from Texas do also. In her place is Selena and Moreno, and she will be speaking on behalf of Maldev. And of course, we know that Texas is not alone. Arizona has been through this. Steve Gallardo is here today, who was a former senator at the time, who would talk about the Arizona experience. We have State Senator Lara from California, who will talk about their experience. And then we have experts to talk about this, from the professor to a litigator. So you'll see that our panel is going to look at different perspectives to make sure that we all understand exactly what we're facing and how you might see it in your own community and how to fight back. Leading the conversation is Professor Victoria Defrancesco Soto from University of Texas. Victoria is a contributor to MSNBC, PBS, and CNN, as well as a regular political analyst for Telemundo. Victoria teaches in the Department of Mexican American and Latino Studies and is a fellow at the Center for Politics and Governance at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. She's been named one of the top 12 scholars in the country by Diverse Magazine. Now, this panel is going to be ready to go. Y'all make sure that you've got questions ready in case we have time. We're going to try to make sure that we allow for a little bit about that. But please remember, this can impact all of us. I always say that it may start with that traffic stop because you don't have a taillight, but it could lead to a detainment and ultimate deportation that will lead to a broken family. And then all that will lead to broken faith in our system and the part of our community. So let's all work together. Let's listen. Let's get ready. And be above everything else, let's unite and fight back. Professor?
Thank you, Senator Garcia, and thank you all for being here today. Professionally, I've been looking at the issue of immigration for well over a decade. But for most of us in this room, immigration isn't just another policy issue. It's something deeply personal. It's something that affects us in terms of our parents, of our grandparents, of our children, of our siblings. And you add on to that what has happened in the last couple of years of immigration policy becoming even more personal, even more localized. When we look at Arizona's SB 1070, when we look at Texas's SB 4, this isn't something that happens beyond us. This is something that happens in our communities. In this panel, we are going to take a deep dive into what these laws mean. And what these laws mean for us on a day-to-day basis, how we live our lives, what decisions we make in terms of whether or not we're going to run an errand or not because we're scared that we might get pulled over. And second, what are the political implications? What's the long game here? Where are we going to be as a community, as Latinos, in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years, as a result of these laws? I'm a teacher, and so I can't help but give a mini lecture when I have a microphone. So I'm going to take 2 minutes of your time because I think it's really important to understand the larger context of the history of immigration and immigration policy in this country. This country is almost 250 years old, and we need to understand what is happening right now, what's happening in Texas in particular, factors into that. And so it's interesting that for about the first 100 years of this country, we had a completely open arms policy when it came to immigration. But then in the late 1800s, we started to see that policy start to constrict, what we call the closing door of immigration. And I think this is a really important date for us to remember when we think about immigration. 1882. 1882 was when the US Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. And what happened there is it set a precedent in our country for looking to exclude persons based on their race and their ethnicity. And the door to immigration has been closing ever since, but more particularly, it's always been targeted toward one group or another. And I joke, in a sense, Latinos can't really take it personally, because at one time or another, the ancestors of nearly all Americans were targeted. Italians, Jewish folks, Irish, now it's Latinos. The other important thing that we need to keep in mind when we are talking about immigration is that it is a federal level issue, squarely something that should be in the purview of Washington, D.C. But as we all know here, our immigration system has been broken for a long time and limping along. And what has happened then is that our states have taken up the baton in trying to figure out, for better or for worse, what to do about immigration. We saw in the mid-1990s, California take its first stab at trying to deal with issues related to immigration. There was a lull, and then in 2010, we saw a number of states, spearheaded by Arizona, put into place restrictionist immigration laws. Today, we see Texas doing the same. So understanding that, yes, this is happening on the local level, but it is is part of a much bigger constellation of federal level laws that have not worked for us, and that while we work to change what is going on in our local levels, we can't lose our eye from what is going on in DC. With that, I am going to turn it over to our expert panel, which we are lucky to have this morning. Let me briefly introduce each of them, and then we're going to start the conversation. To my immediate left is Texas State Representative Rafael Anchia, who is the chair of the Mexican American Legal Caucus and former NALEO Educational Fund chair. His Dallas district is just a little bit off of where we stand today. Next, we have Harris County Sheriff Ed Gonzalez, Ms. Selena Moreno, a staff attorney at MALDEF, Mr. Gabriel Sandoval, a partner at a law firm focusing on issues related to immigration at the local level, and also a former senior counsel in the Office for Civil Rights in the Obama administration. Next, we have Supervisor Steve Gallardo from Maricopa County, Arizona. And last but not least, California State Senator Ricardo Lara. If we could welcome them all with a round of applause, please. Let me start with Representative Anchia. You have been in the trenches in the past couple of months, so if you can give us a sense of the genesis of SB 4, beginning with the legislative session in January, and how it moved through the Texas legislature to end up being signed by Governor Greg Abbott just recently.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. If I can contextualize it for everybody, at the outset of the session, in the governor's State of the State speech, he declared, quote unquote, sanctuary cities an emergency item. That ensured that the bill was going to speed through the process, receive preference in terms of treatment vis-a-vis other bills. And then that's exactly what happened. The Mexican American Legislative Caucus, and many of my colleagues in the caucus are here today, worked really, really hard to either slow the bill down, appealed to the Speaker of the House that this bill would get out of control on the House side, which it ultimately did. But the wheels of the legislative process were greased for this bill. It spent very, very little time in any procedural committee, unlike other bills. And despite the fact that in the committee hearing, there were over 600 people who testified against the bill and less than 10 people who testified in favor of the bill, it was shot out of committee and to the House floor very, very quickly. Now, the Senate passed a papers, please bill, and the House, out of committee, included provisions that only would trigger the asking of citizenship status or lawful presence if there was an arrest, which in our view minimized the impact of, it was still a bad bill, and the pretext for the bill was still bad, but it minimized the damage to our community, which was the goal of many of us, right? We said, hey, if something is going to pass, we want it to impact as few people as possible, regardless of what the motivations, which I think were impermissible and unlawful motivations for the bill. We warned the Speaker of the House, every member of the Mexican-American Legislative Caucus, who is a committee chair, sent a letter, save two, I think, sent a letter to the Speaker, said, please don't bring this to the floor. It's going to get an immigration bill on the Texas House floor in this political climate where you have a president who calls Latinos rapists and criminals is going to get out of control. Now, it was represented to us that his leadership team would hold and it would not get out of control, but in fact, the minute it hit the House floor, the bill was attacked from the right to make it papers, please again. And the members, the GOP members of the House headed for the hills and ultimately voted for the most egregious form of the bill possible. Once that occurred, the Senate, which had passed that egregious form, concurred with the House, and it went straight to the governor, who bragged that he was getting his signing pen ready to go. There was going to be a massive action against the governor at the governor's mansion that day that he was slated to sign it. So he signed it on a Sunday night in private via Facebook Live, as opposed to standing in front of the media, standing in front of members of the public. And that's really how this thing went. There was a lot of other intrigue and context that I could give you, but I don't want it to be too inside baseball. The reality is that the governor declared this an emergency item despite the fact that virtually 100% of ICE detainers are complied with in the state of Texas. I'm not speaking as to whether that is good or bad policy, but the study that we did showed 99.788% of ICE detainers are complied with. So it was clearly not an emergency per se. But what it was is an attempt by the governor and by members of the legislature to put a brown face on an item and use, in my view, impermissibly use race to push a politically motivated legislative agenda. When the governor in his State of the State pointed to the most important case that he could show, he pointed to a Latino immigrant, undocumented immigrant, who had murdered a woman in Texas and said, this is Exhibit A for why we need this. Well, in fact, that Exhibit A had been in ICE custody 3 times, had been deported 3 times, and regrettably, because of our broken immigration system, had murdered someone. But the sanctuary cities or papers, please bills would not have stopped that case. Yet it was Willie Horton-esque. And for those of you who are too young to remember, Willie Horton was a black man that was used kind of as a political pawn to attack someone. This bill was built on a foundation of lies and really sort of racist pretext. And I think that's what made it most egregious in a state that is 40% Latino.
So I think it's very important to highlight just how much effort was put into trying to stop SB 4, first in the Senate, and I know Malk in the House was putting forward every effort they could. But as he said, the larger political context, not just here in Texas, but nationally, was just too much of a wave to fight against. So this is where I think we move to a different strategy, and this is the judicial, the legal strategy. And once we saw the writing on the wall and we knew that this was going to pass and be signed by Governor Abbott, we knew it was a foregone conclusion that this was going to be fought out in the courts. So, Selena, if you can talk to us about the court challenge that was brought almost immediately and how you see that challenge in the short to medium term playing out.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'll say, thank you to Chairman Anchia and everybody in the legislature, our allies at MALDEF. Over 1,000 people came out to speak against SB4. We came up short, but we are taking the fight now on Monday to federal court in San Antonio to block the law before it ever takes effect on September 1st when it's scheduled to. MALDEF is proud to represent San Antonio, Bexar County, San Antonio City Councilman Ray Saldana, and 3 amazing organizational plaintiffs, Lupe, Workers' Defense, and Tache. And along with our other plaintiff groups, we are going to court to tell the judge that this will have irreparable harm to our community, to the jurisdictions in the state of Texas, and this law is unconstitutional and cannot stand. And, Chairman Anchia mentioned the way that the governor signed the bill into law. Well, the very next day, the governor actually took a playbook, a page out of the book of Governor Pete Wilson in California, but he didn't finish reading until the end. Because when Prop 187 was passed in California, Governor Wilson also sued MALDEF, just as Governor Abbott did the very next day after SB4 was signed. And what both governors were trying to do was intimidate our community from standing up in court against this bill. And I know that we draw tremendous strength and inspiration from our clients, particularly those that are the most vulnerable. They are certainly not intimidated, and neither are we. And we look forward to the courtroom fight on Monday, where Nina Perales, who could not be here, she will be presenting oral argument and live witnesses for the court on Monday.
Okay, so that's a good excuse for why Nina's not here. We'll let it slide. Sheriff Gonzalez, as a law enforcement officer, you were on the ground. You are seeing firsthand the effects of a law such as SB4, as we say. It's where the rubber meets the road. So can you talk to us about what you have seen? And the justification was that SB4 was not anti-Latino, was not anti-immigrant, but it was about public safety, and it was about making Texas safer. So are we safer? Are we not safer?
In my opinion, this law will make us less safe. I represent Harris County, which is primarily in the greater Houston area. It's the 3rd largest in the country and the largest here in the state. And as a law enforcement officer, to me, it's imperative that we work with all communities, especially the immigrant community, to make sure that we're getting information, to make sure we're solving crimes, violent crimes, and that we're also making sure that they come forward to report, that there's a trust factor there. And to me, this diminishes that, and this is what I try to advocate at the state level and with our allies also stating the case. But our voices were ignored by the governor, in my opinion, and those that passed this, because I think that it's important for them to understand that in our diverse communities, there's already a sense of fear to begin with. There's already an underreporting of cases of family violence and sexual assault, and this just makes it worse. We've heard anecdotally where some individuals, some women have said, I should have never called on my husband because now he may get deported even though he's beating me, for example. We've heard cases like that. We've heard children that say, now when mommy and daddy are late picking up from school, I'm concerned, I'm worried that they've been deported. And so I'm grateful for those law enforcement professionals, especially the large urban areas that understand diverse communities, that have stood up and have advocated against this. But again, those voices were not heard, and we need people to feel comfortable to come forward, and they can't when we have this kind of law. That's why I've been in office in this role since January, and soon after taking office, I ended a 287G in my community because I knew that this type of law just, again, brings, just negative connotations, and there's a fear that's associated with it. So instead of us going forward now, we're going backwards, it seems. And I think it's very offensive that as an elected official, I could run the risk of being arrested and removed from office by not complying with this. I was elected by the people to serve and represent and determine what the best priorities, what the law enforcement priorities should be for my jurisdiction. I'm on the ground. I know what happened to local control. I was elected to represent my constituents and to determine what we should be addressing, and to me, that should be violent crime. And this type of law, with people being in fear, hurts everyone. Because if there's a Latino that was a witness to a crime, now they're going to be afraid to come forward and report those crimes. Hence, I'm unable to then go after the perpetrator, or the Latino community could be targeted because those predators will know, well, they're not going to come forward because they're going to be afraid. And it also could lead to racial profiling as well, because now with any lawful stop, they could be subject to immigration. If we wanted to be immigration officers, we would have signed up to work in immigration, you know, and so again, it's just, you know, very unfortunate, and right now Texas is at ground zero.
Thank you, Sheriff. Gabriel, you come at this issue from a very, excuse me, eclectic background. So you were in DC with the Obama administration in the Civil Rights Division of the Education Department, but then back in the 90s, which seems a long time ago, but you were in the trenches with MALDEF in the Stop 187. And now you're working with local communities to figure out how to best address the fear that has consumed our communities at the national level and also at the local. So if you can talk to me about the most effective education policy approaches for policymakers in this room to take back with them when they're talking to their constituents or they're talking to their community members about the fears that they have about immigration.
Sure. So I am a partner at a law firm in California that represents the majority of school districts and community colleges. And after the election of President Trump, we had a lot of questions and concerns that were related to how to support and protect undocumented students. And it was our effort to have convenings across the state of California to brief our clients and also the public about what are the laws that are still in effect. Unfortunately, when you hear pronouncements by the White House or members of the administration, that leads to a lot of confusion and a lot of fear that's palpable. And so our main course of business was to ensure that the public knew what is in fact still the law. So we reminded individuals that Plyler v. Doe is still the law of the land. And what does that mean? That means any individual cannot be denied based on immigration status to attend a public elementary and secondary school under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. This is a case that was brought by the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Educational Fund in 1982, and is still law of the land. So I want to ensure that everybody across the country understands that. We still also have federal anti-discrimination laws that are still in effect. Individuals should not be harassed, they should not be bullied, they should not be discriminated against, so we wanted to ensure individuals knew that that is still the law of the land, and we should ensure that individuals who feel that they're being discriminated against or harassed, they should know what the policies and procedures are at the school district, at the community college district, at the university, so those matters are addressed. We also heard concerns about the prospect of ICE coming to campus. And so there are a lot of entities throughout the state of California that are putting together protocols to ensure that individuals feel safe or understand that if ICE were to come knocking on the door at our school sites, at our campuses, there's a protocol in place, that they understand that there are limitations and that need to work in concert with their president's office, with their counsel, to ensure that not only civil rights laws are not being violated, but our constitutional protections. We also wanted to ensure that we still have privacy rights. So under the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, individual student records are still protected under certain conditions. And so this is incredibly important. It's about communicating what is the law, what still is in force. Because unfortunately, sometimes individuals feel the mere fact that they are teaching our students, doing what they're supposed to do, is in violation of the law. This is creating confusion, and it's our responsibility as leaders in the community to ensure that there is constant, real-time communication with individuals across this nation to let them know we are still fighting for rights that still exist, whether they're constitutional in the courtroom or whether it has to do with civil rights. And that is what we've been doing across the state on an ongoing basis, working with organizations like MALDEF, like the ACLU, like the National Immigration Law Center, and leaders like Senator Lara.
Thank you. And I think in this climate of fear, misinformation just tends to multiply itself.
Right.
So it's hard enough to already grasp, and then you add on the fear component.
Right.
Thank you. Supervisor Gallardo, I'm a fellow Arizonan, so a special place in my heart. 7 years. We're 7 years out from Arizona's SB 1070, which we know came on the heels of the Tea Party movement and really held the banner for this larger trend in localized anti-immigrant laws that we've seen. So can you talk to us about the good, the bad, and the ugly that has resulted in the past couple of years since SB 1070 was signed into law?
Well, let me start off by saying this. And if the governor of Texas and the lieutenant governor, who continues to want to try to push a bathroom bill, if they do not think that there's an economic boycott right around the corner, they're fooling themselves. They're living in Never Never Land. My suggestion to my fellow Texans is to be aggressive. The author of Senate Bill 1070 was removed from office a year and a half later. We made it a point. He was target number one. He represented the most reddest legislative district in the state of Arizona. And we made it a point that we were going to make an example of this individual. We knew we wouldn't be able to beat him with another Democratic candidate, so we found another Republican candidate who was sympathetic to our needs. We invested millions of dollars, and we removed that senator from elected office. Texas, don't wait for the courts. Don't wait for the courts. There's a lot of positions you can take in order to push back. Otherwise, they will continue. One of the things, and it goes back to 2004, we had our own Senate bill, or Proposition 187. It was Prop 200. And we waited to see what the courts did. Later on, they came up with Proposition 300 that targeted our students, our dreamers. Then we had Proposition 100, 101, employer sanctions. We did English only 3 times in Arizona. And then ultimately, Proposition or Senate Bill 1070. You got to push back. You got to be aggressive. You got to be bold and brave. One of my favorite congressmen is from Arizona, from Tucson, Congressman Raul, who bravely, right after Senate Bill 1070, was passed, went on CNN and said, it is time to boycott the state of Arizona. Let me just put this out here. Since that, we have not had any anti-immigrant or anti-Latino legislation introduced or passed out of the Arizona legislature over the last 7 years. And a lot of that was because of the actions we took as a community to get more engaged. We created a program to be more aggressive in our elections. We started building relationships with allies we've never had before. I'm a progressive, liberal, gay labor senator, and I had no interest. Back then, I had no interest in meeting with a lot of groups, particularly some of the business groups. But it pushed me to say, wait a minute, we need to build alliances with these groups. My question is, where is the business community on Senate Bill 4? Where are they? It is their elected members. It is, let's be honest, folks, let's be honest. It's Republicans that are pushing these types of bills. And who are the strongest supporters of many of the Republican elected officials? It's the chambers, the business community. Why aren't they stepping up and saying, wait a minute, knock it off? Right after Senate Bill 1070, we had 60 CEOs in the state of Arizona send a letter to the Republican caucus telling them to knock it off. Knock it off. Not only are you damaging the reputation of Arizona, you are hurting our economy. We lost nearly $250 million in tourism. I think it's a lot more. It has created a black cloud over the state of Arizona that is going to take us forever to get out from underneath. So we have to engage with some allies. We need to reach out to folks we've never reached out before to get them on our team, to be able to tell those handful of Republicans that want to continue to push this that we are not going to stand for it. We're not going to accept it, and we will push back. Let it be from an economic standpoint or a political standpoint, but you got to make a point. And I would encourage Texas to not just wait for the courts. Be aggressive. Go after those sponsors. You don't have to challenge them with the Democrat. Challenge them with the Republican. But get them out of office. Make an example of them.
Thank you, Supervisor, and thank you for highlighting that this is a battle that has to be fought on many fronts, and that also politics makes for strange bedfellows, and to embrace that. Senator Latta, close to 25 years since Prop 187. Prop 187, many thought for a while there that it was going to be the exception that confirmed the rule that, you know, states weren't going to get involved. But now we see that they have, in fact. So with the time that has passed since Prop 187, we have seen some pretty drastic changes in California demographically and also politically. So can you talk to us about how Prop 187 affected Latinos politically, but also the larger dynamic in California since then?
Right, thank you. You know, first, I'd just like to say on behalf of the California Latino Legislative Caucus, to say that we stand in solidarity with our colleagues in Texas. And we were watching closely what was happening here and offer any help we can from California. You know, Prop 187 is very bittersweet for us because I don't think Gabriel and I would be here sitting if it wasn't for Prop 187. It really politicized a large group of us that thought we were all white, and we were like, oh my God, we're American. And all of a sudden, they're like, no, you're not like us. And really, and having two parents that lived in this country as undocumented immigrants in LA, really put a face to just the vitriol that is racism, that is profiling. And so a couple things have happened in California since 187. You have a much more informed electorate in the Latino community, but that doesn't mean that there isn't still anxiety and fear given the new administration. But something that's very critical in California was that a proposition was passed to create an independent redistricting commission that really took the redistricting power out of the politicians in Sacramento and into this board. And a lot of us were very concerned with that. Of course, you know, we were sitting, I was a member of the House at the time. But what it made is really created fair districts where now they became much more competitive. And even in the Republican districts, in California, I don't think there's one single legislative district that doesn't have over 30% Latinos. And so it's helped really make more moderate Republicans and even some of our Democratic colleagues much more confident that not only would they get reelected, but that these are the right issues that we need to tackle. And so California has completely embraced immigration law. And we've taken it upon ourselves to write our legislation regardless of what happens at the federal level. And so we're moving our sanctuary state bill. We're moving bills to protect our databases in which, you know, we provide services, healthcare, education, and so on. And so we're not going to wait for the federal government for absolutely anything. But, you know, that's saying and coming from a place of being the 5th largest economy in the world and being California, but we know that we have the responsibility to engage in policy in Arizona and in Texas and help be any service to our colleagues that are going through what we've gone through 20 years ago. So, you know, I absolutely agree with our supervisor. We need to attack this by multiple fronts. We have to be unapologetic of who we are as a community and be unapologetic about the fact that some of us are undocumented and there should be no shame in that, and that this goes beyond any border, any state border. we have to be able to engage fully in other states that are seeing this and continue to push back at every level of government.
Thank you. So what I want to highlight from State Senator Lara is the battlefront of the redistricting. So it's something we may not immediately think of, but we're coming up on another census and then another redistricting. So we know that in Texas, we have had a lot of gerrymandering. 2010, probably the high point. So another battlefront would be in getting fair districts, not as highly gerrymandered.
Can I weigh in on that just
Yes.
really quickly? Because it provides further context for SB4. The week before SB4 came to the floor, a 6th federal court decision came down finding intentional discrimination by the state of Texas in either photo ID legislation or redistricting. And to put it in further stark relief, we are still in illegal maps today that were originally drawn in 2011 and 2013. And the courts didn't say, oh, just discriminatory effect against Latinos. No, discriminatory intent. And not democratically appointed judges, but also Republican appointed judges in 3 different courts in Washington, D.C., San Antonio, and Corpus. So when you think about where we are on SB4, you have to see it against that discriminatory intent that 6 federal court decisions have found. And that's really, really important. So as Latinos, we're being impacted not only by SB4, but by gerrymandered lines that disenfranchise us across the state.
But real quickly, just on top of that, I think we can't take for granted and assume that Latinos, our community, understand what Senate Bill 4 is all about. I can almost guarantee you have Latino families, 3rd, 4th generation Latinos, voters, that are going to look at it or hear or read in the paper and say, it doesn't affect me. I'm a 3rd, 4th generation Latino. Why do I care? The fact is you cannot implement Senate Bill 4 without racially profiling. You can't. If anyone thinks it is only our immigrant brothers and sisters that are targeted, I'm sorry. We had it in the state of Arizona. We saw it with our sheriff where he was pulling over anyone who looked brown regardless. So it is going to be the 3rd, 4th generation Latinos who are going to be pulled over. They're going to be obtained. They're going to be questioned. They're going to have their rights violated. And that is the message that we need to send to the entire community. Inform them what Senate Bill 4 is all about. It's not just attacking the immigrant. It's attacking everybody. You cannot implement it without racially profiling.
Now, so picking off from Arizona's experience, and you mentioned this earlier, Supervisor, where is the business community? So Representative Anchia, we know that there was a battle within the Republican Party. It wasn't just Democrats and Republicans, but within the Republican Party. So talk to us how the Chamber of Commerce influence was able to shrink away and we saw the more conservative forces take over.
In 2011, a Papers, Please bill passed both the Senate and the House in the state of Texas. Same time they were doing the intentionally discriminatory gerrymandering and photo ID bills. The difference was that the business community showed up at the end of the session and into 2 special sessions that were called by Governor Perry and said, this has got to stop, right? You had the largest home builders in the state. You had Perry Homes out of Houston, and you had the CEO of the largest grocery store chain in the state that said, no, we aren't doing this. And you know what? It died a very, very quiet death. This time around, the big difference is that the business community was unable to fight a 2-front war. And I've been very, very critical of the business community in Texas because they were so focused on the bathroom bill that while discriminatory and horrible and symbolically very negative for the state of Texas, impacts, just to be very clear, a much smaller cohort of people than SB4. I mean, if we just want to look at scope of magnitude, SB4 impacts conceivably 40% of the population. But they were unable to do it. They were successful so far on the bathroom bill. We're going in for special session on the 18th of July, and we're going to continue fighting hard with the business community against the bathroom bill. But they just couldn't fight a 2-front war. On SB4, they completely collapsed. They were ineffective. And some of them, like the Texas Farm Bureau, you think the Farm Bureau, that farmers need immigrant labor in the state, they actually put a card in for the Papers, Please bill on the Senate side. And that is inexcusable and unforgivable.
So we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the politics and the political chess game here, because it was no coincidence in Arizona that then Governor Jan Brewer was losing. And she latched on to this immigrant proposition in 2010. Same thing in California, Governor Pete Wilson. And you go back to the 1800s and you go back to the early 1900s. And anytime you had a politician, an elected official that was floundering, they would look to immigration as a lifeboat because it conjures up so much emotion and so much passion. And I think we saw a lot of that here in Texas as well, with Governor Abbott feeling a lot of heat from his right flank. So we can't divorce the issue of political calculus and the political chess game from that. Steve, I see you want to jump in. Did you want to jump in?
No, I mean, the business community, you got to hold them accountable as well. I mean, the fact is, they're reaping the benefits of undocumented labor. They are, let's be honest. They're making money. So hold them accountable. And I think that's where organizations in Texas and national organizations need to look at Texas and say, does an economic type effort is needed here? I mean, this is what got the business community's attention in Arizona, is when we had the economic boycott. We lost millions of dollars in tourism. Naleo, stood with NCLR and did a similar hands-off on Arizona. You got to send that message. And business community, listen to their pocketbooks. And when you hit them in their pocketbooks, that's when they wake up. And they will send a letter to the Republican caucus saying, knock it off, similar to what they did in Arizona. 60 CEOs sent a letter just a year after Senate Bill 1070 and told the legislature to knock it off. You're hurting Arizona, you're hurting our economy, you're damaging our reputation here in Arizona, to knock it off. So you got to engage the business community.
To your point on using the immigration issue, and it's very easy, right, to do that, because immigrants, regardless of what point in generation, are vulnerable folks. This is why it's critical for us to be unapologetic about owning our immigrant story now more than ever, and not even in your own social circles being very upfront about the issue, because this is why politicians use it, because they, Latinos, we're very, we don't like to talk politics. We don't like to talk about our own stories, even within our own parents, right? Talking about their immigration story. But this is why we need to take a playbook from our LGBT community that, we are very upfront of who we are. And we know that if you meet somebody who's openly gay, that's going to change your perspective, because we're your neighbors, we're, your colleagues, we're your coworkers. We as Latinos need to not excuse anybody from talking ill about immigrants or about Latinos, because we tend to shy away from these conversations, but we need to be more upfront and apologetic about who we are, because once you understand our story, you understand that we're your neighbors. We're just like anybody else. We care about jobs. We care about the economy. It's very interesting. We're talking about the economic impact. When I landed here, our Attorney General just put Texas on our no patronize list. And the governor called me last night, what are you doing in Texas? And I said, at the moment, I'm learning how to two-step, but and I failed miserably. But I think, it behooves to have our other states also be able to weigh in. The fact is, now nobody from our state legislature or will be able to attend conferences here in Texas or Mississippi and Alabama. I believe those were the three states that were put. But this is a coordinated effort for us to push back as well, and to be able to demonstrate that we are an economic engine, that Latinos do contribute to the economy, and be able to demonstrate that by hurting folks temporarily where it matters the most, which is their pocketbook, but also understanding that we have a judicial perspective. We have to support our legislative colleagues here in Texas and empower them to continue to push at every level of government here, because I'll tell you, there is light at the end of this tunnel. California was that place before, and to see how far we've come now, to be able to, demonstrate that you can have the most inclusive immigration policies, the sky's not gonna end. You're gonna continue to be an economic powerhouse in the world, and by demonstrating that inclusive policies work, and they incorporate everyone, and everyone continues to be able to have part of this American dream. Because let's not let one election, let's not let one bill determine who we are as Americans and who we are as Latinos. So we need to continue to push and support every effort to defeat this in Texas and anywhere where it rears its ugly head.
And there are a lot of lessons to be learned. So let's look to Arizona, let's look to California. But I really think that your point about looking to the LGBTQ playbook is incredibly important. Look at how other communities who have been repressed have followed suit. I want to turn to the topic of what's going on the ground level. So here I want to talk to Gabe and Sheriff Gonzalez. So Sheriff, you hope for the best and you prepare for the worst. So let's assume that September 1 rolls around and that SB 4 goes into effect. What can law enforcement departments across the state do to mitigate the effects of SB 4 in the community?
Yeah, I think one of the things we can do is to continue to reinforce that, although I agree with the supervisor that racial profiling is still going to creep up in this, because of, Latino community being targeted with this, that we reinforce that racial profiling is not allowed, and also to create a policy where I make sure that the deputies document why they're asking and to identify their probable cause and make sure that they're documenting in a report what their purpose was. What was their probable cause for asking, what steps that they take, so I could have documentation of what they're doing, so I could then better understand and see, who's really out there, playing ICE agent when, again, they should be focused on other police priorities. So I think that's one area that several major law enforcement sheriffs and chiefs have talked about.
Okay.
Can I highlight something just
Sure.
to riff off the sheriff? So for the first time in Texas history, you have Spanish surname sheriffs elected throughout the state. In Austin, in Harris County, Houston, you have a Valdez here in Dallas, and of course throughout the Valley, El Paso. And isn't it a coincidence that this Papers, Please bill also creates a provision that allows the state government and the Attorney General to remove democratically elected Spanish surname sheriffs from office if they fail to comply with this Papers, Please bill. And I don't think it's any coincidence. Now you have in Bexar County, in El Paso County, in Travis County, Dallas County, Spanish surname Latino sheriffs that are democratically elected in these urban areas that were one time, strongholds, and they're getting elected. So boom, all of a sudden we see a bill that can remove all of them.
Yeah, and to add a little bit more to that, we are seeing a difference between the major urban law enforcement leaders and the rural ones. We have more diverse communities. Houston is recognized as the most racially and ethnically diverse community now in the country. LA Times had an article actually in May talking about this. Over hundreds of languages spoken, over 93 consulates, 1 in 4 are foreign born. But they talk about safety, yet at any point, I was the only county, part of me taking office, that was involved with 287G until I took office and removed it. The only sheriff in the state out of 254 counties. Nobody else had it. And so they could have signed up at any point prior to this if it was all about safety. At any point prior to SB4, they could have signed up. Then new presidential administration, other things are happening. Now everybody, all these smaller municipalities are starting to sign on to it. So where was the fear before? What is this trying to solve? If you really want to solve this issue, we need comprehensive immigration reform, not to put unfunded mandates at the local level on local law enforcement.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's really the interest here.
Yeah.
And I want to add that is exactly, what they're talking about. That's a violation of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and that is one of the things that we'll be arguing in Monday in court, because these are folks that are duly elected, often by Latino majority districts, and part of what the Voting Rights Act does is it's supposed to protect the choice, the candidate of their choice, right? When Latinos elect somebody, that is the very purpose of the VRA. And so you cannot then just thwart the will of the voters. It is Governor Greg Abbott, not King Greg Abbott.
That's right.
Right, yeah. So Lena brings up a very important point that the attack on the immigrant community is being waged by the Republican administration here in the state on multiple fronts, and hence we're going to have to fight it on multiple fronts. But Gabriel, going back to this theme of fear that is pervasive, what are the tools and the information that superintendents, folks who work in the administration of community colleges can take back with them, especially in light of the threats? There have been a lot of threats of funding being removed from the federal government, educational dollars. So what can you tell these administrators?
Sure. So there are a lot of tools, and fortunately in California we have a lot of individuals working together. We have from the governor to the attorney general to individuals like Senator Lara. We have a mature nonprofit civil rights structure there, and so they're working together. I think as a preliminary thought is what can we do together as members of NALEO to work in a concerted way to assist other communities that don't have that type of leadership, that are pro-immigrant and understand that immigrants have been part of the American history since day one. So what can we use here as a vehicle to provide toolkits or opportunities in a more focused way when there is a solicitation for help from our community in different states that are not as progressive as the state of California? But what we're doing in California, I think what's important is to reach out to stakeholders in the community. We are advising and encouraging our school districts and our community colleges. They are hubs of the community to work in concert with organizations like MALDEF, with organizations like the Coalition of Humane Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles, to develop not only opportunities to provide legal services, but also to ensure that the undocumented immigrants and students and their families find that they are supported by administrators. So what have they been doing? They have been passing policies, and when I say they, at school districts and community colleges, that emphasize that they are going to continue to do what they have been hired to do, and that's educate students. Two, that they would not be focusing on issues that are problematic. So for example, we know that there are individuals at this time that are taking advantage of undocumented immigrant communities. So there are notarios or immigration consultants. So we make sure that they are reminded of that. There are also school districts and community colleges that are identifying one person who remains constantly aware of what policies are taking place at the federal level and at the state level, because our community now more than ever needs real-time information. We also understand and appreciate that we need to work in partnership with our elected officials. We know, for example, that Mayor Eric Garcetti is working in concert with organizations like the California Community Foundation to invest funding so that individuals are being represented if, in fact, they are facing enforcement proceedings. The key issue here is to provide communication to those who are affected, that you are supporting them, and you do this through public pronouncements. There are some communities, for example, that maybe don't want to do a board resolution, but what the key part is that they understand that there is a superintendent or a president that is concerned with their welfare and that they're there to help them out. And that could be done by way of a letter to all community members. It could be done by way of just public pronouncements, because right now there is a need to ensure that we're all aligned to protect our undocumented students and families. And so those are some of the ideas that folks have been doing across the state. So whether it's board resolution, changing policies, having someone who is charged with the responsibility on campuses to provide them with support and provide them with real-time information. Because as I mentioned before when I first spoke, there's a lot of confusion out there, and it's our responsibility to give accurate information on that front.
Thanks, Gabe. And Representative Manchia, you want to jump in on the issue of higher ed in particular?
Yeah, this bill is so bad that there is a quote-unquote sanctuary campus provision in this bill that allows any employee on any campus to report that campus to the Attorney General. So if that campus has, quote unquote, a pattern of, or practice of accommodating immigrants, like let's say a Dreamer student group is meeting on campus, an employee on that campus can make a petition to the Attorney General to sanction that campus and have it declared a sanctuary campus. This is something that Governor Abbott insisted on. We were demanding that it be taken out because so many of our what we call Texas DREAM Act students are on public campuses, both at the community college level and the higher ed level. They were so mean-spirited that they wanted to put those kids in fear by including this provision in it. And I find that so offensive on so many levels, and that's why this governor needs to be called out.
And I've got to highlight here that Texas was the first state, even before California, a couple months before California, Texas was the first state to grant in-state tuition to undocumented students. So how things have changed in just a couple of years. But Gabe.
Now let me add that this question of sanctuary jurisdictions or sanctuary cities or sanctuary campuses, there's been a threat made by the federal government that they will be defunded. We know recently there was an executive order that was issued in January, and there has been action taken by municipalities in the state of California to put that to a stop. We know that the county and city of San Francisco, as well as the county of Santa Clara, brought a lawsuit seeking an enjoyment of the particular executive order. And so right now, the particular provision of the executive order that was issued by the Trump administration seeking to defund so-called sanctuary jurisdiction is right now at a stop, has been enjoined. But what's important about that is the following. One is there's been a lot of school districts and other administrators from community colleges questioning whether or not they would be defunded if they were to support undocumented immigrants. And it is clear to focus and highlight on that issue. But it's also important to understand that there are a lot of barriers that the Trump administration has to overcome to ensure that their will take place. The case law is against that particular point of view. And what I mean by that, there are 10th Amendment protections that state that states and localities cannot be commanded by the federal government to take on, which is part of a federal regulatory scheme or immigration enforcement. 2, the receipt of federal funds have to be related to the purpose. In this case, for example, educating our students are antithetical to enforcement of our immigration laws, right? So fearful district administrators or the like should have some common relief with regard to that. The third part of it is there has been a clarification issued recently by the Attorney General in response to the cases that have been filed by the County of Santa Clara, by the County and City of San Francisco, that states the fundings that they're only going to go after are those that are issued by the Department of Homeland Security or the Department of Justice, and not by the Department of Education. So that is something that is incredibly important to ensure that individuals feel at ease that they continue to do what, again, their responsibilities are under existing law. And there are good organizations like MALDEF, like other municipalities that are fighting the fight in the courtroom because, as, you know, we don't have a king in office. We have a president of the United States that needs to be checked and balanced.
Thanks.
And I really...
Steve, let me get Selena first, because we're on the topic of the judicial strategy and the shout out to MALDEF. Are we comparing apples to oranges when we're talking about the legal battles of SB 1070 and Prop 187, which both essentially got stopped in the courts one way or another? Is SB 4 another animal? Because as the Attorney General of Texas would say, we looked at what happened with SB 1070 and Prop 187, and we constructed it in such a way that we would pass all of these hurdles. What are we seeing?
Well, in some ways, SB 4, is far worse than SB 1070 in the sense of the state overreach. So as Chairman Anchia mentioned, it goes into the higher education realm. And so we represent the Texas Association of Chicanos in Higher Education because their free speech rights are violated. So they can't now, if you're a professor in a classroom and you want to speak out and have a political debate in the classroom on the topic of immigration, let's say a political science professor, and you want to speak out against SB4 itself, for example. You are now, under SB4, you can make liable your university. And so what it does, it makes universities less likely to hire folks that are speaking out. And so there's a real threat in terms of constitutional rights, not just in the sense that we've been talking about in racial profiling, but First Amendment rights of professors, of city council folks. And so in that sense, I think it goes far beyond. Even though the papers, please provisions are a little bit different, SB4 is just such an enormous state overreach.
Broad overreach. Steve?
And no, I think as SB4, though, there's some unintended consequences, and it's much, much larger than just the higher ed. It's the K-12 system as well. Right after 1070 was passed, even though it had nothing to do with our elementary schools or high schools, students left our school districts like you wouldn't believe. Cartwright Elementary School District, a school district in which I was a board member, we lost 1,000 kids overnight. We closed down schools, we laid off teachers. The fact is parents are scared, they don't understand it. They keep their kids from going to school, or they decide to move to a more friendlier state. We lost so many families to California, Nevada, New Mexico. They just left Arizona. So I think when you start talking about the impact, yes, that terrible impact to our higher ed. Cannot forget our K-12 schools where our families, our parents, they trust our elementary schools. They trust our schools. They trust them with the most precious thing they have, their child. They're not going to allow their child to go to school if they believe that they're going to be in danger some way. So you might see an impact on your K-12 schools. For you school board members out there from Texas, it'd be interesting to know, if student enrollment drops at all because of Senate Bill 4.
Thanks. We only have a couple more minutes left for the panel, so what I'd like to do is ask each of you to take about 2 minutes and give Texas your advice. You too. Representative Anchia.
I had my café con leche today already, so I'm a little bit caffeinated, and maybe you go to someone else because my advice might not be PG-13.
Might be, yeah, we do have to keep it. We're live streaming, so please,
Yeah,
PG-13. Yeah. Selena.
I think one of the things that really mobilized folks in California and in Arizona was all of the hate rhetoric around Prop 187 and 1070, and you really saw that again in Texas. All throughout the legislative session, and then culminating on the last day of the legislative session with a Representative Matt Rinaldi, who, as many of you have probably seen in the newspaper, said that our community doesn't love our country, called ICE on the folks that were in the House gallery, and really did what we fear most about SB4, and saw a group of brown people and said, they're all undocumented. I'm going to call ICE on them. And so, don't get mad, get even. That's my advice. I mean, we have the power at the ballot box.
I like that. Don't get mad, get even. Sheriff.
Thank you. I hope that this is just another reminder that elections truly do matter. And it's important that we look at who represents us at all levels. And I think that hopefully we could use this as an opportunity to really galvanize the Latino community, to really take note of who's advocating for them, who's not, and how issues that are debated, not only locally, but at the state level and nationally, have a tremendous impact on all of us. And I hope that we could see that, because I think it could really impact our state and our local communities. I was talking to Senator Lara earlier, and beyond just the economic impacts, the drain on our workforce, leaving to other jurisdictions that are more friendlier to the immigrant community. So instead of us growing and really embracing our diverse communities, we could really hurt our local economies in that way. But I really hope that communities can come together, work around these issues, and really step up and get people elected to office that are going to advocate for all communities, diverse communities, immigrant communities. I think that's very important for us to learn.
Thank you, Sheriff. Gabriel?
I've been working on these issues since the 80s, and one thing that obviously we all know is that this is an ongoing struggle. and that this is an issue that we need to come together in a more consistent way. Organizations like NALEO and organizations like MALDEF and our elected officials. But we also understand that there are a lot of individuals who want to seek office. It's our role, I think, to ensure that they understand the importance of civil rights compliance, constitutional protections, that they too become equal partners, walking shoulder to shoulder with each of us to protect our community, and then hold our elected officials accountable and the individuals who support them accountable. Shed light on why are they acting certain actions that are affecting our community in a real way. This is something that is ongoing, and it's also important to understand the role that MALDEF continues to play in other civil rights organizations, and that we need to invest in their efforts as well. This is a collective, concerted effort that will be ongoing, and that is something that I understand and appreciate, but we all understand and appreciate that we all have a role to play, whether it is a school board member or an individual who's in elected office or a business person. What role are you playing to move this agenda forward, a progressive agenda, to ensure that no student is discriminated against, no student feels like the other because he or she is undocumented? That's, I think, is important.
Thank you, Gabriel. Steve?
Texas, the entire country is watching. Everyone's watching to see what happens next. My only suggestion is to be bold, be aggressive, push back as hard as you can, because however this gets resolved, chances are if it doesn't work out correctly or the way we like, you can for surely bet it will pop up in other states. Everyone is watching. Build those alliances, work with other segments of society that you can join forces together. Right after 1070, I went to my gay and lesbian brothers and sisters and I told them, you might as well come and join us in this fight, because it won't be long until they come after you. And now they have a bathroom bill. So build those alliances, because I guarantee you, if it's not the immigrant community, if it's not the LGBTQ community, it's going to be the Native American community or our African American brothers and sisters. We got to unite together to push back against this hateful type of rhetoric continues to pop up. Texas, we're all watching, we're with you. Whatever we can do to help, we're there.
Thank you.
You know, I would say to all the Texans and our legislators who are fighting this movement, know that you are on the right side of history. You cannot be deterred. You are doing what is absolutely correct, and it is difficult. And, you know, when we were seeing on TV everybody who turned out to the Texas Capitol, you know what I saw there? I saw future governors, I saw future senators, I saw future members of Congress. Let's take this opportunity that's going to have ramifications for this state, for, you know, to kingdom come. Let's take the opportunity to organize, to mobilize, and to diversify our movement, and to be able to use this as a tool to provide more leadership in our community, to demonstrate that out of this effort, they're going to regret the day they even put that bill into that session, into that legislature, because you are now mobilizing an entire community that is not going to forget, like the Latino community in California has not forgotten Governor Pete Wilson or Prop 187. And to think of the fact now that California 20 years ago was reliving this, to now, you know, understanding that California wasn't part of this country's founding. When this country was founded, California was not part of it, but now California is the keeper of this country's future, is telling of where Texas can really foresee its future now, and really understanding that this is a movement that SB4 has created. This is a movement that is not going to go anywhere, and we're going to use this to mobilize and organize Texans and the Latino community in Texas to now take the reins of the future of this great state.
So, don't get mad, get even. Elections matter. We all have a role to play. You build alliances, and you get bold, you get aggressive, you push back, and it's going to be difficult, but in the end, we're in the right. Thank you all for all of your insights today, and thank you for attending the panel.
Terrific. Thanks.
Oh,
Quick photo.
Oops.